right, everyone. Welcome to the Stoa. Happy Valentine's Day. And today we have Alexandra Gustafson joining us. Alexandra is a PhD candidate at the University of Toronto, whose philosophical work is primarily on the phenomenology of love, especially romantic love. And today's theme is on unrequited love or one-sided love. And how today is going to work, I'm going to tag in Alexandra in a moment, and she's going to present, share her screen, and then we'll have a Q&A. So if you have questions anytime, pop them in the chat. And when we get to the Q&A portion, I'll call and you can ask Alexandra your question. If you don't want to be on YouTube, just indicate that. I can read your question on your behalf. And we're here for 60 minutes. So that being said, Alexandra, welcome to the Stoa. Happy Valentine's Day. And Tag, you are it.
Thank you so much. Happy Valentine's Day, everyone. Let me begin by sharing screen. Okay, can everybody see that? I see thumbs up. Perfect. Perfect. All right. Thank you so much, Peter, for that introduction. And thank you so much to the Stoa for the invitation to speak today. I am thrilled to be here on a Valentine's Day talking about love. We're going to begin with a little participation. So with a show of hands or with, Zoom reactions, tell me, have you ever loved unrequitedly? Have you ever loved someone who didn't also come to love you back? Yeah, I saw a few hands. I certainly have. Well, my talk today is especially for you. So, my talk will be an attempt to persuade you to embrace unrequited love. First, I'll say a few words about what exactly unrequited love is and why it hurts so much, before discussing the reasons why unrequited love tends to hang around. I'll then argue that all love is sublime in the Kantian sense, before concluding with the recommendation that the unrequited lover embrace their love by adopting what I'll call an attitude of affirmation toward it. With that said, let's get started. We begin with unrequited love. What is unrequited love? Well, by unrequited love, I mean unreciprocated romantic love in particular. Now, please note that this does not include cases in which love is withheld by a romantic partner as a means of manipulation. That is, I want to rule out cases of abuse, but rather I'm thinking only of cases where love never comes to develop. We come to love someone, but they don't come to love us back. What exactly these cases look like, I'll have more to say about. But for now, to the more pressing issue at hand. If you raised your hand at the beginning of this talk, then you know unrequited love hurts. If you have ever loved unrequitedly, then you know that living without any hope for a future with your beloved is a pretty painful experience. When in love, we usually have a desire that our beloved love us back. If they don't, it can pain us very much. Even without the frustration of this desire, however, loving unrequitedly still hurts. Why? I think for the bare fact that our beloved does not love us. This is sufficient, I think, to explain the bitterness of unrequited love. This being the case, no wonder we might wish that we weren't in love, that we could stop being in love, or even that we had never loved at all, right? I mean, no wonder people employ all kinds of techniques to get over those who don't come to love them back. So in George Eliot's Daniel Deronda, Rex Gascoigne, after being rebuffed by the dynamic Gwendolen Harleth, he begs his father to allow him to defect from England to Canada. And I will confess to all of you here that I once considered something very similar in the wake of my own heartbreak. Now, others might seek comfort in a weekend or a few of heavy drinking, or find themselves set up on a series of blind dates by overbearing sympathizers. Indeed, right? Friends will offer us all kinds of concoctions and home remedies to get over our love. Those who have loved unrequitedly, however, know. Though this friendly advice is no doubt well-meaning, it's also misguided. This is because while the proposed remedies might give us time and opportunity to heal from the hurt of the disillusionment, they won't actually cause us to stop loving. Now, why not? Because the fact that it would be better to stop loving is not itself sufficient to stop us loving. These are what we call prudential reasons. And these prudential reasons to fall out of love simply miss the mark, given the nature and structure of love as irrational and, in a sense, unconditional. But the situation is not entirely wretched. I hope to persuade you that while loving unrequitedly is bitter, it can be made bittersweet if you change your attitude toward it. As I've said, love is irrational. Now, what does that mean? Well, rational love is love justified by reasons. For example, we might imagine Tolstoy's Anna Karenina loving Count Vronsky for the reasons that he is charming, persistent, and attentive. Irrational love, by contrast, is love that is not justified by such rationale. There are many reasons, if you'll forgive the pun, why I believe romantic love has this irrational form, one of which is a puzzle known to philosophers of love as the problem of particularity. So it goes like this. If it's true that love is rational and that we love people for reasons such as their charm, persistence, and attentiveness, it's not clear why we should love any one particular charming person over any other. All sorts of people are charming, persistent, and attentive. Why love Vronsky? So some philosophers of love believe that it is shared history that solves the problem of particularity and provides a justification for romantic love. After all, while there might be many charming people in the world, only Count Vronsky met Anna at that Moscow train station. In the case of unrequited love, however, there's a strong reason to doubt that this is correct. After all, doesn't unrequited love sometimes blossom upon first sight or develop over time for a near stranger? I think so. And if love is possible in the absence of a relationship, well, then the relationship cannot serve as its reason. So I say that love is irrational. In consequence, though it may indeed be better in a pragmatic sense for the heartbroken lover to move on, this higher order reason, this reason about reasoning, will not cause or persuade us to actually move on. This is because love is not the sort of thing either justified or undone by reasons. Some might say, but what if this love is causing harm, right? If the loving pains the unrequited lover, surely this, if nothing else, gives them reason to stop loving. Yet, I repeat once more, love is not the kind of thing that is swayed by reasons, even this one. To borrow from Shakespeare, once in love, we can love someone, as he says, even to the edge of doom. Take Dickinson's Sidney Carton and his love for Lucy Manet in A Tale of Two Cities. Though she did not love him, in fact, loved someone else, still, he died for her sake, taking the place at the guillotine of the man whom she did love. In this way, we might even think of romantic love as not only irrational, but also unconditional in a certain sense of the word. That is, our love is not conditional on its being returned or on any other reason. It can both exist and persist despite the reasons. If you are one of those who has loved unrequitedly, and you are persuaded by my arguments that your love is irrational and unconditional, and therefore immune to rational or deliberate undoing, you might at this point be in some renewed distress. But please, fear not, for I believe that there are compelling reasons to embrace your predicament. So I have already said that unrequited love can be deeply painful, and I stand by this. But I hope you will forgive my saying that. If it is torture, it is torture of the most sublime, and I mean this quite literally, kind. And I believe that a sublime torture is a torture worth bearing. Thus, I say that the unrequited lover need not wish so impatiently for their love to end. Instead, they might embrace their love, adapting an attitude of affirmation toward it. If you embrace your love, unrequited though it may be, it need not hurt you so. So, this may sound all well and good, but what does it mean to embrace love? Well, it's something very much like radical acceptance. Though love itself is irrational, it seems plausible that we can still take certain attitudes toward it, doing that for reasons. If we reject our love, this can cause in us a kind of rift. We don't endorse our love, and yet we can't help but love. This results, I think, in a kind of alienation, contributing to our ultimate experience of bitterness. If instead, however, you can adopt an attitude of affirmation, you need not be at odds with yourself. So this is what I mean by embrace unrequited love. Adopt what I'm calling an attitude of affirmation toward it by telling yourself, I'm in love, and that's okay. Now, you might worry that prudential reasons for embracing your unrequited love, again, reasons regarding betterness, are the wrong kinds of reasons. You might worry that the notion that it would be better for me to embrace my love doesn't give you the right kind of reason to actually do so. Understandably, you might think that having certain attitudes requires having certain beliefs. For instance, that having an attitude of affirmation toward your love isn't possible if you don't really believe that it's okay that you're in love. Fortunately, I can offer a powerful, non-prudential reason for you to embrace your unrequited love. As I have hinted, it is sublime. Humor me, if you will, because this is where I get romantic. If you can't be romantic on Valentine's Day, though, when can you be? That love is irrational, and that we are capable of it is, I think, something to rejoice in. Helpless though we may be, we are capable of irrational, unconditional love, which is the closest we may ever come to the infinite or the eternal. So I'm thinking of something akin to Kant's mathematical sublime. Though I may be one of the only philosophers to ever accuse Kant of being romantic, to paraphrase him, the fact that we are capable, over and above reason, of feeling something so immense, so overwhelmingly powerful, and so beyond our control, indicates a faculty which surpasses every standard of sense. To love is to exhibit a capacity beyond the capacity of sense and even beyond that of reason. The depth of feeling of which we are capable is the ultimate expression of our humanity. And our relative helplessness before it is perhaps the essence of what makes us human. As the poet W.H. Auden wrote, "If equal affection cannot be, let the more loving one be me." If love is mathematically sublime, however, then of course it is only metaphorically so. But surely love needn't be strictly either mathematical nor dynamic in order to be sublime. These are Kant's categories, after all. The sublime is, for Kant, the closest that one can ever get to peering over the edge, to looking beyond the phenomenal or thinkable world. Love is therefore perhaps best thought of as sublime because it either is or at least gestures at something that we can't quite make sense of. Indeed, see how we look for the reasons of love. We want love to be rational so that it can be sensible. Yet, love defies our best sense-making strategies. Love isn't a choice, and yet it still is something that we do, not something that merely happens to us the way that a cold does. There's something incomprehensible about this. And this reflects, I think, a deep incomprehensibility and essential mystery about the nature of agency, even our own agency to ourselves. Our experience of and attempts to analyze love are perhaps the closest we can come to having an account of the self that is outside of the limits of practical reason. Love is something that exists on the maximal outer limit of our agency's thinkability. Love is therefore sublime in that it gives us a glimpse of the supersensible. In short, love, including unrequited love, is exceptional. It can endure anger, pain, grief, can persist against all odds and exist in the unlikeliest of places and times. As I have said, it can both exist and persist, even despite the reasons. So, though it may pain you that your beloved does not love you back, take comfort. In loving, you are peering over Kant's edge. The edge is not something to be shied away from, though it is formidable. Rather, regard the precipice with awe and rejoice in your proximity. Now, though this claim may not be ultimately satisfactory to some, I really do mean it to be more than just a salve. Romantic or otherwise, returned or not, love is sublime and worthy of embrace because it reveals in you, the lover, a unique and noble capacity. Thank you so much.
All right, let's give a round of applause, a silent round of applause for Alexandra. Thank you for that wonderful presentation. If you have any questions, start popping them in the chat. I have 2 questions to warm up the STOA. One's a theoretical question, the other's a practical question. I'm gonna stop your screen now. Yeah, I really like this argument. So the first question, what comes up is, so a couple of New Year's Eves ago, like my wife and I were like in an altered state or two, and I remember like we're getting romantic, and I asked her like, "Why do you love me?" And then she's like, "I don't know, I just do." And then she followed up with like, "If I needed a reason, then it's not really love." And I remember at the time I was like, "Whoa!" I was like blown away by it, even though I theoretically kind of like knew it already. And I think what really struck me about like what she said and how she said it was like the realization I was hunting for reasons. Like I was hunting for reasons to be lovable. And underneath that was like a sense of not being worthy to receive love. And so I'm curious with this like, even though you have the capacity to give love, but this like sense of being unworthy to receive love, which I think a lot of people have. And I'm curious how you think unworthiness of receiving love plays into unrequited love. Because I can see the argument that if you feel unworthy of love, you want to put yourself in a situation where you're not going to be able to receive it, and then it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I like your lopsided kind of like asymmetry that like if you love your capacity to love despite not receiving it, there's like it's like a pure kind of like aspect there, and then it could lead to the sublime. And I think I agree with that. But I'm curious what you think about the unworthiness aspect associated with unrequited love.
Absolutely. I think you're really on to something here. I think that most of us feel unworthy to receive love and feel like we have to earn it, right? And so when we ask someone why they love us, what we're hoping for is like a list of our good qualities or something like this, something that can validate our worth. It's often said that you can't love someone else until you love yourself. And I think that this is just wrong. I think many of us learn how to love ourselves through either loving someone else or being loved by that person. Because we come to learn that love isn't about reasons, that our worth isn't something we have to earn. Rather, love is something just like one human being recognizing another and recognizing the inherent and intrinsic worth that we all have simply in virtue of being human beings. And this is enough to justify someone's loving us and is enough to make us lovable. I think the trap of unrequited love, if we're someone who tends to love unrequitedly, may be exactly what you're hinting at, that we have, in some sense, a belief about our own worth or an insecurity about our own worth, and we put ourselves in a position where our love can't be returned. I think if we worry less about our own lovability and whether someone else is going to come to love us, and focus instead on the nature of love as not conditional on anything like our perceived value, maybe this will have some kind of therapeutic effect and help us find requited love in the future.
Yeah, and I'm not persuaded by that kind of argument. I think it could be quite dangerous too. Like, you gotta love yourself first before you can love someone else. I think that can like lead to some form of narcissism. But I found for me is sort of just melting away the sense of unworthiness and like realizing I am worthy of love. And then the moments that when my wife Camille kind of said those things, those were like concrete evidence of that. I could receive love, and then she also gave me a greater capacity to give it as well. So my next question is a more of a practical question. So we had Caroline Elliott come to the Stoa, who wrote a book called Existential Kink. Are you familiar with that book? It's really good. I'll put it in her Stoa session in the chat. Basically, it's actually a practice where some, this nebulous, whatever, it could be anything, like maybe a sense of shame or a sense of like you don't feel like you're good enough. And then she has this technique where you just get like erotic, you get like turned on, and you get off on that sense of whatever it is. And then it kind of alchemizes it, and then it kind of just gets processed, and you become more individuated. I really like it because this is sort of like a practice for like the Stoic amor fati, love thy fate, but in a very kind of like, fun way. And I can see this type of practice, existential kink, apply to the unrequited love. Like you have all this like constellation of things going on, and then you love it, and then it alchemizes it, and perhaps something sublime could emerge. So I'm curious what you think of the existential kink approach, and how would you put this argument in theory into practice, or how have you put it into practice?
Yeah, that's super interesting. I'm not familiar with the theory, so I'm going to be just guessing here. But it seems to me that existentialism as a whole has a focus on embracing one's situation. So, without getting too deep into the weeds here, Sartre, for instance, thinks that we are both what he calls freedom on the one hand and facticity on the other. So we are both the ability to act freely, to make choices, to do whatever we want. But on the other hand, we are constrained by things like scientific laws, norms, facts about our history and character. And so for him, living is a balancing act. One has to simultaneously understand and consider the facts while embracing this ability to act totally freely. And it seems to me that something this existential kink notion has going for it is something like a radical acceptance and a being present and other kinds of buzzwords that we're using today, right? And I think there's something right about this. If we focus on the thing in itself and our enjoyment of it, the pleasure we get from it, or the feeling of the sublime, the experience itself, then I think we can spend less time worrying about whether it's correct, whether we ought to love the person we do, and all of these kinds of things. So I just riffed a little bit, but I hope that makes some sense.
Yeah, cool. And I'll send you that, or I put in the chat, the existential kink session. So if you have any questions, pop them in the chat. Shay, you had a question.
Yeah, it sort of became thematic for me because I had seen that Saint Valentine was the patron saints of epileptics and honeybees. And so I was pondering the fact that Saint Valentine obviously didn't have a lover. And how did he get to be the patron saint of this day that's all about this type of romantic love? And do you think that he had this theory about love in general, that it was for him always unrequited?
Such an excellent question. I wish I knew more about the history of Saint Valentine and Valentine's Day. Unfortunately, I only know a little. But it seems to me, right, like as a saint, we can assume he lived a fairly ascetic life, one that, right, may necessarily have therefore included unrequited love. There is I guess I would say, historical tradition that sees unrequited love as especially noble or especially pure, because it isn't sort of muddied by the practical considerations that a relationship entails, right? Like, relationships are messy and they're bodily and all of this stuff, but unrequited love, the distanced admiration of someone, is, in some sense, because it's abstracted from all this, more pure, more noble. And so it seems plausible to me that unrequited love may have been for Saint Valentine, though I have no idea, an especially noble kind, because there is that historical tradition there. So I wonder, I join in your curiosity.
Thank you.
Thanks, Shay. If anyone has any questions, feel free to pop them in. If not, I'll keep asking questions. I got many. So one that's coming up is when you ask that question, has anyone had unrequited love? And I kind of just I don't know, because when I sensed into it, I had definitely the experience of that phrase, that construct, unrequited love, or what psychologists call limerence, or where I had a longing that wasn't reciprocated. But I don't know if that's love, though. That's why I was kind of and there's this cool term that I like in the poly community, new relationship energy, NRE. I'm not poly, but I find that community was quite informed with falling in love rapidly with many different people, and so they experience this intense emotion of oneness, and then it faded, and then another person came, and then it faded. We're people who are monogamous, like myself, only experienced that maybe once or twice. And when I experienced that new relationship energy, it's it's such a high. but I don't know if that was love either. It's like some kind of like a mutual addiction. And so, yeah, I guess this goes down to the definition of like, what is love? And is that being experienced? Even though I think the argument is right to like, if you have the capacity to love one way, like do that. But is that actually love when most people have unrequited love?
Yeah. So what is love is probably the most difficult question in all of the philosophy of love. And philosophers of love don't agree on what exactly it is. So interestingly, there are philosophers who think that love is necessarily what they call a union. And this is literally like the fusion of two persons into one. Now, these views, because they revolve around this kind of melding together, exclude the possibility of unrequited love entirely. They just say that's not love because it's not a union. It's not the conjoining of two persons. And there are other theories of love that also would say about unrequited love that it's not love, precisely because it's not returned. I think that philosophy's job is to describe the world as it is, however. And so I think that ruling cases out because of the theory just isn't the right, what I would call, direction of practice. We shouldn't be making theories that then consequentially decide that some things are love and some aren't. Instead, we should look at the world, how love is being experienced, and come up with a theory that describes what exactly is going on. So that's a bunch of preamble to say that I think love is experienced very differently by different people. I think the experience of love has some uniform qualities, some things that we can look at in individual instances and say, this is what ties all of those things together. But I think that generally speaking, love is quite variable and is experienced differently depending on the person loving and the person being loved. Now, one thing that romantic love seems to feature is exactly what you're talking about, this new relationship energy, this initial infatuation with someone. Is that a necessary feature of love? Does new relationship energy have to happen in order for something to be called love? I don't think so. I don't know. I wonder what you think about that. Personally, I would say that for any individual instance of love, if we're trying to figure out whether it is or not, love is the kind of thing, and this is cliched, but love is the kind of thing that when you know, you know. Within philosophy, we call this luminosity. A luminous fact is one that when you know it, you know it. And I'm getting a little technical here, but all of this is to say that when you're wondering whether you're in love, if you're still wondering, you're not quite there yet. When you stop wondering, then you are.
I can give an amen to that. Awesome. Thank you for that answer. Mohammed, you had a question, so you can unmute yourself and ask it. You're still here. Yeah, you're still here.
Hi, Thanks for the presentation and answering the questions. It's wonderful. My question was about loving your enemies. Do you think that's an expression of unrequited love? And does it go beyond unrequited love? Because so far what we've been talking about is someone feels unworthy of being loved, and therefore they question themselves. Can they be loved? But what I'm asking is, in a way, the opposite of that is like, can someone else reach a state where they can be unlovable to us? And that usually is someone who's trying to hurt us or harm us intentionally. So that's my question. Where does that stand in philosophy of love? Do you think that's an expression of unrequited love, loving your enemies?
Really interesting question. So the funny thing about loving our enemies is if they see us as enemies and they choose to love their enemies also, then we love each other. And that's sort of funny, isn't it, for enemies? So I think that love of an enemy need not be unrequited if they're thinking along the same kinds of lines that we are. And this puts us in a really interesting position, namely that of loving someone that we don't like. Now, there is a body of literature within the philosophy of love that's concerned with whether it's possible to love bad people. So, say, for instance, you have a child whom you love very much, only it turns out that that child is a serial killer, right? Experience, not personal, fortunately, but cases in the world suggest that it is possible to love bad people. It is possible to love people that we don't like. And I think that this is further reason to think that love is irrational. Because if love was the kind of thing that we did for reasons, well, these reasons are plausibly about the person, like their good moral character, for instance. And in the case of a bad person, it seems like we have no reasons to love them. In fact, we have many reasons not to love them at all, right? And yet, we still can. So those are my thoughts there. I think that love of our enemy need not be unrequited and is in fact possible because love isn't the kind of thing that we do for reasons.
Any follow-up question to share, Mohammed? All right. Let's see. Ed, is that you have your hand up, Ed?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just thought my case might be interesting, which is like, so I haven't had any kind of sexual relationship or partnership for 15 years. And I sometimes think about it in terms of what could be the cause of this? Is it because I don't want that? Or, which is one plausible hypothesis. But there are actually, I can come up with hundreds of causes, possible causes for this. But so then 15 years ago, there was this relationship that lasted a year or a bit longer. And I was delighted by it. And so one of the possible causes that I thought for why I haven't had such a relationship again is that I'm still in love with that person. So this is a kind of form of unrequited love. But I have all the joy and delight. It's still present with me. after all that time. And then I realized that looking for other causes was like denying that the presence there, that I'd forgotten, that I was saying to myself, yeah, why am I alone? Da, 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 da. And by that very question, I was denying the sense that I still got all the delight of that relationship is still present. And then when I think of it that way, I feel completely happy. So I don't know if this confirms your philosophy.
Thank you so much for sharing. That is such an interesting case to me, and that seems right. I think that love and romantic relationships are importantly separable. A lot of people, when they think about romantic love, they necessarily think about, well, the love we have for our romantic partner, for our wife, for our husband. But love doesn't necessitate a romantic relationship. We can love people we aren't in relationships with. In fact, many of us do, including loving people that we're no longer in a relationship with. And I think that what you're saying is right, that even though the relationship is over, we can still enjoy the love. And this is because love is this noble capacity that we have. We can celebrate the fact that love can persist even past the expiration date of a relationship. This can, of course, be tricky because it fills us with perhaps longing for that person, a desire that the relationship could have lasted longer, a wish that we had been more compatible, these kinds of things. But it's also something to take comfort in, because we have this incredible ability to sustain a feeling for this long, for, as you're saying, 15 years. And I think it's perfectly reasonable that that should give us comfort and pleasure, right? We need not be in a relationship in order to feel good things. So those are my thoughts there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Ed. Yeah, I'm curious, maybe drifting slightly away from the topic of unrequited love and about love more generally and the philosophy of love. And I'm curious how you think, or how it has influenced your relationships engaging in philosophy, especially in philosophy of love. Because on one hand, and I'll kind of like speak on personal experience, because I was trained at the University of Toronto for philosophy, and I thought philosophy is my thing. But one criticism of philosophy is that can be a cope, from actually because you're in the theoretical skies and you're not really embodied in the world, processing things in a more visceral way. But if philosophy is the love of wisdom, and then you become more wise, then perhaps you become wiser in romantic relationships as well. So I'm curious how you see philosophy. Feel free to answer this abstractly or personally. How you see philosophy can help or hinder with romantic love.
Yeah, another excellent question. So I actually got into the philosophy of love in order to help me understand what was going on in my romantic life at the time. So it was a few years ago, and I met someone and I hated him, and he hated me, and we were not friends. But circumstance had sort of thrown us together and we had to get along. Well, next thing I knew, we were in love. And how that was possible was beyond me. And so I turned to philosophy to figure out what had just happened, right? Like, how is it possible to go from disliking someone so much to feeling so strongly for them? And so my personal life and my professional interests have always been very closely tied together. And my thinking on love has certainly impacted the way that I regard love, and I think in the way that I love. In particular, this discovery and subsequent belief that love isn't the kind of thing we do for reasons has helped me to feel more confident and secure in my love, in both the love that I give to other people and the love that they give to me. I used to feel insecure when a partner asked me, much like your wife said to you, or you asked her, right? Like, why do you love me? And I couldn't provide reasons, right? Like, all I could say was, I just do. And it felt like when I tried to give the big list, right, of all the positive characteristics that my beloved had, it just didn't fully capture it. It just missed the mark. It just left something wanting. I could have a list 100 items long, and it still wouldn't fully explain why I love the person that I do. Realizing that this is because there's something wrong with the list idea itself was really freeing. It's allowed me to enjoy and embrace love differently, to accept the fact that it doesn't always make sense. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I have to ask you about Stoicism for the last question. I saw a tweet, which we were talking about before we let people in, that you did about how you're drawn to Stoicism, but you're hopeless existentialist. I think how you worded it. And I remember when I was in academia, in academic philosophy, those were like the only two. I was kind of really drawn to existentialism as well, and Stoicism, because those were the ones that felt most like an operating system, or could be an operating system of how you actually navigate life. And I ended up going down the Stoic route, which led me to Pierre Hadot's, the practical philosophy movement. And that's what kind of the Stoa is embodying. And so I'm curious, when it comes to Stoicism, what are you drawn to about Stoicism? What are you seduced, if you will, to Stoicism? And what maybe kind of like gives you hesitancy?
Another great question. I think that the most important question in philosophy is, how should we live? And there are different ways to answer this question. You might think about ethics, morality, how we ought to treat each other, these kinds of things. But I think even before we think about other people, we have to think about the conditions that we find ourselves in, the way that the world really is. The thing about both Stoicism and existentialism is I think they take seriously how difficult it is to live. The fact that we find ourselves torn between options, the fact that we experience difficult or negative emotions. And both of these schools of thought, though they are very different, they take seriously the seriousness of the problem, given the way the world is. how are we supposed to live? When it comes to Stoicism in particular, and perhaps this is informed by my existentialist background, Camus, the existentialist, says that the most important problem in philosophy is not how to live, but whether to live, right? Like, given the nature of the world as it is, ought we even go on? Fortunately, his answer is yes. But I think this question of whether we ought to live really resonates with me as a kind of fundamental pre-philosophical question. You know, like, before we even get into how we're supposed to cope with life, ought we do it? And so the beginning of existentialism is death. And the Stoics, I'm thinking particularly of, right, Epicurus here and the Epicurean school of thought, tells us that we needn't fear death, right? That death isn't something we experience, and so isn't something that harms us, and so isn't something to be feared. And that's sort of where I am at the moment, thinking about how to live, whether to live. And it seems to me that these two schools of thought, both existentialism and Stoicism, give us resources to answer these really important questions, right? Like, about the nature of life and death. And it doesn't get more fundamental than that.
Yeah, I like that. And I wonder how getting into the right relationship with death allows one to get into the right relationship with love. And that will be the concluding comment here at the Stoa. So Alexandra, any parting words you'd like to leave us with here, or any like where we can find your work, any papers coming up that you'd like to highlight?
Yeah, thank you so much for that. If you enjoyed this talk, I have an essay on the same subject that you can read. Let me grab the link. I should have done this earlier. There it is. Got it. So I have an essay with Psyche that I invite you to.
Oh, you accidentally muted yourself, it seems like.
Apologies there. I was trying to paste in chat. There we go. So if you're interested in this topic in particular, I would direct you to this essay with Psyche. I have a second essay coming out shortly about the love of objects, if you're interested in that subject. And I invite you to send me an email with any questions or comments. And thank you so much for spending your Valentine's Day afternoon here with me, thinking about love.
Thank you, Alexandra. And while most people are probably on Valentine's dates, we here at the Stoa are philosophizing about not being on one. So I'll make some closing announcements in a moment, but thank you so much for coming to Stoa today, Alexandra. And next up at the Stoa, we have an event next week. It's going to be a cool one. Post-authenticity, prophilicity, and genuine pretending. Hans George Muller is coming in to talk about that, so that should be fun. And you can check that out at thestoa.ca. So Alexandra, everyone, thank you so much for coming to the Stoa today.
Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.